Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Bowen. I am a retired school librarian. I a Shinnecock tribal member, and I love to do online research. So I have always been interested in residential boarding schools. So since I've retired, I have been able to spend more time on my computer and my laptop and my iPad looking for information about residential boarding schools. I looked at Hampton Institute, Carlisle, and then I started looking at Thomas Indian School. I didn't know very much about Thomas Indian School. And so when I started to dive deep into that school, I found so much information. So what I decided to do was start compiling the things that I found, and I'm going to share them tonight with you. I don't know who has had a chance to see the exhibit that's here right now. Raise your hand, people. Okay. So I suggest that you definitely look at the exhibit. I have some of the same images that they have, but I have other information. The exhibit here is focusing pretty much on the school, and there's some photographs of some of the students, some of the children from Shinnecock who went to Thomas. I wanted to look deeper at the children who were at Thomas who were from Shinnecock because they were far from home. And there were 18 students from Shinnecock who went to Thomas. So I'm going to share some of that research with you. I looked at documents and photographs. So I didn't interview anyone, I interviewed one person from Shinnecock, but this presentation is going to focus on just one person who was there, and her name was Lessie Beaman. So I'm going to share her life story with you. I think that you might find it interesting. I think some of it's sad, much of it's sad. So I hope you, and if you do, we do have feelings, and hopefully I don't cry. So welcome to everybody who's here. So this is Thomas Asylum for Orphan and Destitute Indian Children. That photograph to me looks very scary. So it looks like a scary place, and definitely a scary place for children. It's in Western New York, near Lake Erie. I'm going to give you some background information so you know more about Thomas. It was established in 1855 by Presbyterian missionaries. And the name was eventually changed from the Thomas Asylum for Orphan and Destitute Indian Children to the Thomas Indian School, which sounds a lot better. But it was taken over by the New York State and run by the New York Board of Charities. So it became a charitable organization. There were more than 2,000 students there in the time that it was open. And it was open for 100 years. This map I show you is from 1890, and it shows the Indian reservations that were in New York State. And you can see Long Island. You don't see Shinnecock, but we know that Shinnecock was a long, far away place from Thomas Indian School. So Thomas Indian School is located up here on the Cattaraugus Indian Reservation. I hope I pronounced that correctly. If anybody would like to correct my pronunciation. Cattaraugus. Okay. So Shinnecock students would have had to leave from Long Island way over here to go all the way over across New York to get to Thomas. I don't see your pointer. Oh, my pointer? Well, okay. Well, my pointer's there. But it's in the western corner near Lake Erie where that black square is shape. So you want to get up there and point? Thank you. So it's right there. So, and there's Long Island. And there's Long Island over there, eastern part of New York, and they went to school in the western part of New York. Okay. And this was a map from 8. Now, all the documents that I found were all online. There's so many digitized documents online that you really don't have to always leave your house to go and do research. So I'm going to share where I found a lot of this information also. Okay. So we're leaving the map and we're going to go to Shinnecock. What was going on in Shinnecock in 1884? This is a very, I'm going to say, a photograph that a lot of people might recognize. Denise Silva Dennis did this as a painting. And this shows Shinnecock families that celebrating the Long Island Railroad. And this was at Shinnecock Hills. And this was 1884. They often say that this is the photograph of the last of the Shinnecock Indians, but we know that is not true. Okay. So I wanted to share a little about what was going on the eastern coast of Long Island with the Shinnecock people. Most of the information I have, I got from the annual reports of the Thomas Indian School. Every year they would put out a report. So there are over 2,000 pages of information online that you could read about the Thomas Indian School. You could read the narrative of the president. You could read the superintendent's report, the treasury report. You would know how much money they had every year. Most of the time it was like $20,000 they had for a school. You could read about the personal property, how many beds, how many pillows, how many pots and pans, how many dresses. There was so much information. So I decided I could not read all that information, but I wanted to find out about the people, the students, the children who were there. There was also a report of the attending physician. He would tell you how many students were sick, and there would be a long list of how many students had tuberculosis, how many students had headaches, how many students were constipated. All of that information is online if you wanted to read that. So I sort of skimmed through most of that. And I said, where can I find out about the children who went to Thomas? So they have a page called Catalog of Inmates with their nationality and reservation from which each came. They're inmates. So you can search all these documents because they're all digitized and they're PDFs. So I started searching by Shinnecock, and then I would search by names, and then I would look at names and say, who are all these people? So the first two names that came up as Shinnecock names were Leroy Beeman and Lessie Beaman. Those are not names I recognize. Those are not people I know, but it says they're Shinnecock people. So I said, I wonder how I could find out more about who they were. And what can I find in all these documents that are online? Can I find out more information about them? Okay, and this is from 1899. They went to Thomas in 1897. That's so long ago. So this is when I start looking and going deeper into the history. Who were these two children? Were they brother and sister? What do you think? Brother and sister? Cousins? Anybody want to take a guess? That's what I assumed also. And I don't want to speculate about information because I just want to show you facts, but I just assumed they were brother and sister. They were both from Shinnecock, and they both had the same last name, and their both names started with L's. So I thought they were brother and sister. So I said, how can I find out more information? So I went to ancestry.com. And I said, now it's time to look through Ancestry and see what I can find. The very first thing I found was Lessie on the 1900 United States Federal Census. But her name is spelled different because everything is written in cursive. So when they take the cursive and they change it, they don't always spell things correctly. So this is Lessie. Here it says Lessie Beaman. And then she was born in New York and she's 8 years old. So when did she come? She came there in 1897. So she was already there for a few years. She was already there for 3 years in the 1900s. So she went when she was 5. So she was an inmate. If you go down to relation to head of house, she was an inmate in 1900. She lived at the Thomas Asylum for orphan and destitute Indian children. She was a female. She was single and she was a student, and she attended school and she could read and write and she could speak English. And I was so proud of that. But then I started to wonder, what does a little girl do there who's 8 years old, in the 1900s? So I said, I need to do more research. So I started looking at other documents. and started looking at photographs. And then I decided I was really just looking for Lessie everywhere. So I looked at all these photographs and I said, which one of these little girls could be Lessie? I don't know. But there's so many little girls there. And if you look at them, they look sad. And I don't know if any of those girls are Lessie, but I tried to look at a period of time of 20 years. So I looked at photographs before she is listed on the rolls and sometime after, just to see if I could find some information or a photograph or something that would tell me her story, or I could see what she looked like, or learn something about Leroy, who possibly was her brother. So I continued to look at photographs. I found this photograph. And in this photograph, we see lots of girls. I don't know if those are boys. They look like girls to me. I did read that girls and boys they lived in separate dormitories. I don't know if they ate together, but I think they lived in separate dormitories. In my research, I found that there is a daily log of their diet, but it's available only in the archives, in the New York State Archives. You would have to go there to look at it, and you could read what they ate every day for the 100 years the school existed. They kept a diet log of everything they ate. I heard the food was terrible, but so I really don't want to see the diet log, but I think it's interesting that a school kept a list of everything they ate, every meal. So I believe that Lessie could be in that photograph, but I don't know where she is. So I'm going to move along. Any questions so far? I continue. Yes.
When you were looking for the role, how did you find that spelling?
Oh, the spelling is different everywhere. The names are spelled different everywhere. Leroy could be L-E space R-O-Y. His name is spelled Beeman with an A, M-A-N-M-O-N. So, but I tried to match the birth dates. Okay, one thing I also want to say is I could not find any record of her birth anywhere. I found record of his birth. And so I connected that to a family name and I did some research. But as I said, I'm just going to focus on Lessie today and not who her mom was or who her dad was and not even who her brother was, because I don't know. I couldn't find the facts that said that Leroy was her brother. I just assumed. Question? Sure. Sure. Okay, I see it.
Yeah, and then if you, yeah, there you go.
Okay. So then I said, well, what else can I find? So that was the 1900 census. Then I went to the 1910 census, and there was Lessie Beaman, spelled B-E-R-M-A-N. And now she's 18. So she's been there all this time since she was 5. She is no longer an inmate, though. She is now a pupil. So they changed that. And the census would ask different questions at different times. So sometimes they might ask where were your parents born? And it does say father unknown, mother born in New York. So I found that information to be interesting. She is still an Indian, a Native American now, and she still speaks English, but she has an occupation. So I had to try to figure out what that meant. It says ration. So I couldn't find out, but eventually I did because I kept looking. So this is an example of the 1910 census. And one thing about the census, I should have showed you on another slide. I'm going to go back. If you don't mind. Census. This is the Indian population census. There's a certain census just for the Indian population, where they ask certain questions, I guess, that you just ask Native people. So it says special inquiries related to Indians. So there was a special census that they would do, and they would, inventory Indians. This is 1900. In 1910, the census is a little bit different. This does not say the Indian census, but this shows that they're at the reservation at the Thomas Indian School. And Leslie's name is here. Let's see if I can find it. Sorry. Down the bottom. Up top. Up top. You see it? Right here. Okay, I'm glad you can see. So Leslie is a pupil, and she was born in New York. And I think her mother and her father might be in New York. And she speaks English. And she is an Indian still. And she has an occupation as a ration. So I decided that that meant that she received a ration from the school, and that they paid her, or they received money for her care, because she was now in a charitable school. She was no longer in the school that was a missionary school. It was a school run by New York Charities. But, you know, I don't know if that's to be correct. Like I said, I don't want to speculate about things that may or may not be true. So this is Leslie in 1910. She's 18 years old. As I read through all the annual reports, I tried to find out what her experiences could be. She'd been there a long time. So I read about how the girls were responsible for the sewing, the laundry, and the general domestic work, because that would help them, the training for girls to take care of homes. Okay, so Leslie probably washed clothes, did sewing, and learned how to clean the house. And one reason they did that is because they also had them go out and work in homes during the summer so they could earn wages. So Leslie also was employed. Now, one of the things they did when they were doing a lot of the sewing was they made quilts. And I found out that several times they made quilts that they entered into fairs. So there was a quilt entered into the Iroquois Agricultural Fair and the Erie County Fair. I also read that students who stayed on school grounds during the summer would go to the Erie County Fair during the summer. So they did have outings. They took them out. And I thought that I would show you an example of a quilt that was made in 1900. It was not a quilt made by the Thomas Indian School, but this quilt is from the Buffalo Historical Museum. And I'm going to show you my Lessie box when we finish the presentation. And I want you to think about some of the things that might be in Leslie's box here, because I think she had interesting experiences. I'm sure she had some experiences that were horrible, but I don't know what those are, because I just looked at documents and photographs. So I'm going to move on. And I hope she enjoyed her time when she went to the Erie County Fair. And I hope that she went. And I hope that she made a quilt that won first prize. So Leslie was also employed. I found this and I thought this was the most interesting document I had found, because I'd never seen anything like this before. It's the New York State employment card and peddler's license. So I had to think, what does a peddler do? Peddler goes out on the street and sells something. But I think it was because she worked outside the school, that they had the girls and the boys go out and work in homes. And most of them worked in the summer to make money. So I looked and it says she worked in service August 1st, 1910 to September 1, 1910. And she made $16. And so this is one of the documents I found on Ancestry.com. And she was reassigned, but I didn't get any other information off this card. But I thought this was interesting information, and her name is all spelled right here. So I thought, resigned. You think it says resigned? Reassigned? Like I said, that's what happens when you write a script. She either resigned from her job or she was reassigned. So, and she only worked for the month of August. Or did she work until the end of September? You would quit. See if we can make this bigger.
So how old was she?
I would say she was probably 18, 19.
the asylum again.
Yeah, it's back to the asylum. Plus, like I said, I never found any document saying when she was born. So some of the documents that I did find say that she was born in 81, and some say they were born in 82. Okay, so I don't really know how old she was. But so this is 1910. Some of the things that happened during the time she was at school, they established a library. I thought that was very impressive. That was 1890. And I decided to include this book, Anna Green Gables, because it was published in 1908, and it's a story of an orphan girl. So I thought maybe Lessie would read a book like this because it's about a girl who was orphan. But that's me speculating there. Okay. And then there were activities on the school, like a rainbow drill. I don't really know what that is, but they would have exercises every year at the end of the year they called it graduation. So this is an example of one of the activities they did. And this was in 1910. Row, not drift. I don't know what that means, but this is another example of, photographs of children, but they're not identified. So we don't know who they are. So Lessie could be in one of these pictures, but I think she's 18 around this time. I think she's a little bit older. So let's move on. As I read through the documents, I started searching. Like I said, I was looking for her. I was looking to see what I could find about her life. I found out she passed her Regents exams in spelling and in elementary English. And then she was studying piano and the organ, and she played in 2 recitals. And I was able to do this because I just did a search for her name through all these records. At the bottom of this slide, it says there is quite an important branch of the education of the Indian children, for as far as race, they are very fond of music and have considerable ability along that line. 1909. That is definitely from one of the almanacs. So I tried to, from one of the manuals, I tried to find information that sort of showed how the school thought about the Native children. So those are not my words, but those are the words from one of the superintendents. Okay. As I said, I never found a photograph of Nessie, so I used the silhouette. I've never found a photograph of Lessie, so I used a silhouette to show what I thought she might have looked like at the age of 18, 19. And in 1912, she graduated. But this photograph does not identify who's in the photograph. But it said in 1912, she graduated from 8th grade. She was in 8th grade for 3 years, I found out. I'm not sure how that happens. And these are her classmates. And as I look through the 2,000 pages of documents, every year I could see how the classmates would change. Sometimes students went home. Sometimes students ran away. Sometimes students were sick. So her classmates were always changing. Like I said, I don't know much about her life before she was 5. I don't know where she lived. I would like to believe that she lived on Shinnecock, but I don't know because I can't find any records. But I was able to find these records that show she attended Thomas. She was there from the time she was 5, and then she graduated. When I read the page about her graduating, it said that the students were very excited because many of them were going to go off to Hampton, Carlisle, or go home to their reservations. So I said, well, I wonder what Lessie will do. Because if it's time for her to leave school, what will happen? And then I read this page, and it was very upsetting. So I'll let you read that to yourself.
We're cut off.
We're cut off? Okay. Okay. She passed away on July 13th, 1913. Lessie Beaman, whose health was failing at the time of her graduation, passed away on July 13th, 1913. That was on a page in the what do I call those manuals? the reports, the annual reports. And I decided to include a photograph of the hospital because I believe that if she probably spent time there. This was 1913. So she had lived her entire life from age 5 to the time she passed at Thomas, unless she spent time away when she was working at a home during the summer of 19. The next paragraph tells you a lot about Leslie's life. I don't know if you can read that. I have to read that. Leslie, you know what? I'm going to ask Madeline to read that. Madeline loves to read.
Move it down.
Oh, well, it's a magnifying on.
Oh, Nika.
Okay, wait a minute. How do I make it go away? Sorry.
Okay, something from Shinnecock came to us when she was 5 years of age. She was never a strong child, and even before her graduation, showed signs of failing health. As she had no home or friends to give her care, the institution took that place, and we kept her in the open air ward at our hospital. I desire to make a special mention of the devoted care given her through the many long months of her illness by our trained nurse, Miss Bertha R. Knight, for she not only ministered to her every physical want, both day and night, and at the last scarcely left her bedside, but she also provided her with the many little delicacies which added so much to her comfort and pleasure. Leslie was a very sweet Christian girl, and her death cast a gloom over the whole institution. A simple funeral service was held out on the lawn by Reverend J. Emery Fisher, and she was laid to rest in the little cemetery across the way.
Now, when I found this information, this was probably the first information I found about Leslie, that she had died. But I didn't feel like I wanted to introduce that to you right away, because I wanted you to see that she had a life there at Thomas where she learned to play the piano, and she went to the Iroquois Agricultural Fair. I also read all about their curriculum, and they studied nature, they studied plants, and they studied birds. And she learned to sew. And she learned things at Thomas, but she was not with her family. She was far away from home. Her brother, Leroy, he left. He did not stay there. So then she was there by herself for a very long time as the only Shinnecock person. Eventually, other Shinnecock children came to Thomas, but I think she spent most of her life there. That was her home. And this is what they said, that she had no family or friends. As I looked through the research, I found that there was a list of teachers, and Bertha Knight stayed at Thomas. She's listed on the census as staff for years after this happened. I didn't get any other information after that. This was all I could find. Well, there's one more slide. She was buried at United Mission Cemetery. She was in an unmarked grave. And I also found her death notice, which is also a public document. These are all public documents that I showed you. None of these records are sealed. I did find out that student records are sealed at the New York State Archives. So if I wanted to learn more about her, if I wanted to see her records, I would have to get permission from a family member to look at them. Okay, so I don't know what's in her record. I just know that all these documents and photographs are online. I felt like her story needed to be told. It needed to be shared. There were 18 students from Shinnecock who were at Thomas. She was just one of them, and she did not come home. We don't know where her home was. Like I said, I don't know if she was born on Shinnecock or if she was born in New York City. I'm working with people to learn more about her life. I wanted to just share that Leroy left and went to Fredonia State Normal School, and I was able to find records on him. And his records were interesting because it does say that he was born on the Shinnecock Reservation, right here. He was born on the Shinnecock Reservation in Southampton, which is spelled different. I've never seen it spelled that way before. He was born in 1889. This is a draft card. He has 2 draft cards. And like I said, these are public documents. So he has 2 draft cards. He's natural born. This one says he was born in Southampton. He's a laborer, and he lives in Fredonia, New York. It also says he's an African. And he's very tall, right here. So these are some documents I found about Leroy. I don't know what happened to Leroy because I couldn't find any information after that. But these are 2 important documents because it does connect. It makes the connection between the Beemans, Leroy, and Lessie, that they were from Shinnecock. As I look through more documents, I decided to make a list of all the students who had gone to Thomas. So, like I said, there were 18 students. There were some sisters, Clara Harvey, Effie Harvey, and Ernestine Harvey are related to Tracy Gardner, Tracy's family. Tracy over there. And who else? Hi. That's your grandma? Ernestine was your grandma? So she was at Thomas. Alice Lee, her descendants live on Shinnecock right now. My family's related to Bertha Smith. Bertha Smith was also a student who was at Thomas. I'm not really sure what happened with Bertha, but she's buried on Shinnecock, and she was only 16. Some people said she died while she was at Thomas, but I haven't been able to find that. I haven't been able to document that. So there were DeForest, Sarah, and Pauline Smith were sisters and a brother who were at Thomas. Their descendants and relatives live on Shinnecock. There's Cogbills and Cuffies and Smiths and Lees and Beemans. I have them all listed as students who attended Thomas. Yes, yes. Yeah, Lorelei Smith was at Thomas, and he wrote a letter to his, I think that's his mom. Yeah. So as I said, I try to look at documents because I like to do the research. So I look at different documents, and then I try to gather the information I need out of a document to understand history. So like I said, I looked at documents. I looked at lots and lots of documents. I want to say that there were so many other photographs that are available online. Many of them do not identify the people in the photographs, but this one says Raymond Augustus Snock Cuffey was at Thomas in 23. He is in this photograph somewhere. The class of 1935 has Alice Lee in the photograph. I'm trying to get someone to identify which one of these girls is Alice Lee. I can. I don't know. Marguerite, can you identify Alice Lee? Third this way? Here?
Here?
Or here.
Here? This one? This one? No. I mean, I would like to show these photographs to tribal members to see if we can help identify who our relatives are. I think that would be the best way. But I will say that I am using a lot of information from Facebook now. I did not realize there was a Thomas Indian School Facebook group, so I joined that group, and I've been in contact with the person who runs that, and they've given me a wealth of information. So this photograph, this says that Georgette Cuffey is in this photograph, but I don't know Georgette Cuffey. So as I said, I continue to look for people in these photographs. Do you know Georgette Cuffey?
Of course. Not sure.
Not sure.
No,
Okay.
I'm not seeing.
Okay, and James Cogsbill is in this photograph. And I don't know who he is. I don't know the photographs. I mean, I think that maybe Jeremy and I and some other tribal members can start to identify some of these people in these photographs, so we'll know who they are. You can't really see their faces.
Yeah, Claudette name.
Yeah, I told Claudette I was going to send her that photograph. Let's see. And I said, I found out who worked at the school also. That was information I thought was important because I wanted to see if Bertha Knight still worked there. And in 1915, she was still there, listed as the nurse. And she was the nurse who gave Lessie care. So she was still there in 1915. There was a New York State census in 1915. I want to say that my work is in remembrance of Lessie and Bertha and all the Shinnecock children who attended Thomas Indian School and other residential schools. You know, there's been a lot of interest in residential schools in the past several years. I hope that my research helps people understand the Shinnecock experience. There's so much more to learn. There's so many families who I think want to know more about what happened. I was told that children who were taken to Thomas or went to Thomas, and went to the boarding schools, they didn't really want to talk about them when they came home. So stories were not passed down. There was no oral history. I think one person has told me that, you know, there was a lot of crying. They said that their grandmother cried a lot. They remember grandmother and uncles crying because they were so unhappy. I don't know about Leslie's life. I can't imagine that she didn't cry. You know, we don't know where her mother was, where her father was, and she spent all her life there from the time she was 5 until the time she graduated and passed away a few months later. So that's Leslie's story from my perspective. Lessie and Leroy and Thomas Indian School. Thank you. Most of my research came from Ancestry.com, the Thomas Indian School Facebook group. There's a website also called Find a Grave, where you can Google and look for people who are buried at different cemeteries. I've been using that a lot. And newspapers. So I read newspapers, magazines, internet, and I got information from the archives and the Iroquois Genealogy Society. I want to thank people like Jackie Randall, Lauren Randall, Denise Silva Dennis, Josephine Smith, Holly Hale, Thompson, and Deani Brown, and especially the staff of Mom's House for letting me do this presentation. And hopefully you enjoyed it and that you learned something new.